So hello, good evening and welcome everybody. I am Catherine Jordan and this is week 16 of our conversations on community resilience in changing times. And we have some familiar faces again this week because this is part 2 of our Dismantling Conquest conversation. So really glad to have SHODO, Sandra and Kathy back with us. Very big welcome to you all. And so first we just wanted to clarify, what is Dismantling Conquest? So I'm going to hand over to Kathy, who's going to hopefully illuminate us on what we are talking about today.
Well, thank you. I was thinking today, why are we having a conversation about dismantling conquest within this series of community resilience talks? And I was thinking, so I looked up the definition of conquest, and different dictionaries are giving different definitions, but it's a spectrum. It's got a healthy end where you're overcoming something, and it's got an unhealthy end where you're looking to have control over and power over. And when we create a solution to any situation where we have power over, it's an unstable situation. We've created an unstable situation. So in this context of community resilience, we're looking to create resiliency in all of our communities and also within ourselves. So this conversation is to get us all aware of where we can creep into that unhealthy end of conquest, why it happens, what's going on in our psychology, why we're drawn into that, what we need to look out for, and practices that we can adopt to keep us in the healthy end so that we can create solutions both in our personal relationships, in our food growing, in our community infrastructures that are really healthy and that will be resilient. That's why we're doing this.
Great, thank you. That's a really lovely summary and a really lovely take on it. I think what's really interesting about these conversations is all the different perspectives on these topics. Yeah. That was a slightly different one, and I really appreciate the difference. So thank you for that. Great. So I'm just going to invite David now in to join us, who will be telling us what he's going to be doing on the call with us this evening. David, are you there?
Hello, everybody. So I'm just here in the background. Most of the time you won't see me. In fact, you may not see me at all after this little spiel. And my job is to be a link between the event as it shows up on Facebook Live and as it also is being created on Zoom. Now you will see, as if you're watching this event, that there's a comments box. Please use it if you have something to say. We'd love to hear from you. We love it when this is interactive, not just between the facilitator, Catherine, and our 3 wonderful panelists, but also interactive in the sense of including the audience, so that we're all doing this together. So, comments, questions, appreciations, we would love to hear from you, especially if it's that comment you think, well, can ask that, that's the one to ask. And I will either just copy them and paste them to Catherine, or I'll come in live and read out whatever you have put in. So get those fingers twiddling. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have particularly made a sort of special invitation for engagement this evening, because in part 1 of this conversation, we were kind of hoping to illuminate this potential issue. And we're inviting people who are watching to explore this in themselves in the last 4 weeks. And so I also took on that challenge as part of this conversation, and really looking forward to talking more about my experience of that. So if you have watched part 1 of this conversation and you're now listening and would like to share with us your experience of either part 1 or your exploration since then, if that's what you've done, we would really love to hear from you. We'd really love to hear some feedback and how it's been, what's been useful. Was there anything that's come up that's been challenging in that? We would really love to hear that. So yeah, if you would like to pop that in the comments box to David, and then we will bring that into the conversation. So thank you. So that feels like a nice place to start, really. Having done part one, what were you left with? And you know, how were you left after that first conversation? What kind of impact did it have on you, really? I'd be really interested to know. Anyone feel they want to respond to that?
So I was really glad I came. I didn't know any of you beforehand. And I thought, what can I say? It was really interesting listening to the different perspectives, which is like I came, and especially from my American perspective, the conquest is very physical. And so it was interesting to listen to Sandra's psychological Jungian perspective in particular. And I'm looking forward to discussing the internal aspects. I work with those to some extent in myself and my spiritual work. So that's where I am. And I'm like, wow, I got lucky, you know, meeting you all.
Wow, we've been very, very lucky to have you with us, SHODO. And I really appreciate the diversity of perspectives on this. And I'm really glad you've joined us, because I'm aware we're all English, and so we have a certain take on the world. And I've really appreciated your different perspective. And there's a gentleman called David, who is part of our, not this David, another David, who's part of our steering group, who's also in America, and was talking about what he was experiencing or seeing on some level around what's happening with Indigenous people at the moment, still now in America. And I know this is something you've mentioned, you know, so I can see how, you know, conquest is really alive in a very particular way in the States. And
so I see on Facebook a picture of a little girl, I don't know, 11 or something, who was shot by police in Canada. And I said, you're doing it in Canada too? And quite a few people responded to that. And I said, I just didn't know. I knew you were racist. I just didn't know you were doing that. You know, I mean, the shooting of all our Black and brown and red people.
yeah, it's awful, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's awful. I'm glad you're with us, SHODO. I'm really glad you're with us. Kathy, do you feel like sharing how it was for you?
Well, I'm really, really blown away by Sandra's model that she introduced us to last time. I hope we're going to hear more about that, because for me it gives so many layers below an explanation of what's going on within us and how we can handle it. And for me, I have to say, it's a world-changing explanation that Sandra brings. And I very much hope, I know it's quite a new release for you. I know you're only just starting to put it out into the world after some time developing the theory, but I really hope that it gets out with some momentum, because I do think it enables people to go steps beyond well, just having compassion for the people that we are in stressful situations with. And once you have compassion, then you can do so much more in terms of producing constructive solutions, rather than condemning people or looking to conquer them, looking to have power over them. So I've had that on my mind a lot. I think it's so valuable. I really want to help put it out into the world. And I've also been looking for myself around conquest, noticing how it's a stress reaction. You know, I can live without conquest. I can live without an experience of conquest within myself in normal circumstances. And when things feel out of control or I feel too exposed, the pull, the desire, the instinct is to try and nail something down, try and get control. And that has value, you know. Obviously that there's times that's absolutely the right thing to do, but when it's unconscious, that's the issue. When we're all drawn into that, and it just becomes, I'd say it's a root of the problem that we're all in right now, because we have sought to conquer nature. We sought to conquer nature through agriculture, and we developed systems that that weren't in symbiotic relationship, and they've come back to haunt us. This is what I'm saying about conquest. This is what happens when you look to have control over something. It comes back to haunt you. If you create symbiotic solutions, harmonious solutions, then they have resiliency. So I've been looking for myself at how much it's a stress response, and we presume within this series of talks that we will have more stressful circumstances in the coming years. So it's very valuable that we notice that we go there when we're stressed, and we notice what we can do about that.
Great, thank you, Kathy. Yeah, I really agree that Sandra's model also had a particular impact on me, and gave me a framework with which to kind of understand it through a really compassionate lens. And yeah, there's lots of what you just said there that I really second and agree with. And nice to hear your experience. So thank you for sharing that. So Sandra, how was it for you?
Well, thank you very, very much, both of you, for what you've just said, and also SHODO for what you've shared. I wholeheartedly am so glad to have met you, and all of you. I really hope that our connection will last beyond this. I think what I came away with actually was quite, I found it a really, really rich conversation, and all the different voices, all the different perspectives just added and added to the picture that I thought was really important and quite beautiful. And I actually came away with a stronger sort of humility, really, because of the question, how do we apply it? You know, that's where SHODO really started in a way. But also understanding, so one challenge, I think, is that people who are very used to the models that we live with and the ideas that we're living inside think that this is normal. And we touched on this last time as well, when particularly we were talking about, you know, the enjoyment that becomes available through conquest and winning, that whole winning paradigm that's rooted in win-lose. This is what feels normal to us. And so even to propose that actually a significant proportion or significant percentage of what we're doing is about compensating for ourselves, even that is going to sound like a foreign language to a great deal of people. So, so I was left with sort of two questions about that, the challenge of finding a language to bring this into a general awareness, and then also feeling very, very humble about, you know, how often I fail at this, and how that's part of why it's taken me a long time to start to bring it out, because I've also had a kind of perfectionist streak that, you know, I need to be better at this than I genuinely am before I bring it out. But there is something about, you know, practicing it and learning through the failures, and also just learning about the complexity. You know, there can be a simple theoretical approach, but actually the complexity of all the different contexts in which it gets applied with all of the different people, you know, does need to be experienced. And So I was left with both an expansion from the richness of our connection and our conversation, the different perspectives, but also quite a powerful sense of humility about it, you know, because it is a really, you know, it's clear. The question is, how can this be made more widely available if it is needed? And that's, I don't think the answer to that is easy in any way at all.
Yeah, I can completely resonate with that, and I'm sure it's an important question in, you know, now starting to take your work more out into the world about how to make it accessible to people. Something I'm just aware of is that I didn't reread your bios, and I'm just wondering, there might be people who are watching this that don't know who you are. So I know this is a bit late in the conversation, but I thought I might just read your bios just in case people didn't watch the first one and they're watching this one, just so we know who you are and where you're sort of coming from. So so first of all, SHODO Spring, who has said she's in the States, joining us from the States. It's quite early in the morning, isn't it, SHODO, where you are?
No, it's just afternoon.
Oh, just afternoon. Okay, so not too early. So SHODO is an ordained Zen priest and teacher. She's the founder of Mountain and Water Alliance and the leader of the 2013 Compassionate Earth Walk along the KXL route. She is creating a book about consciousness and climate change, and she also works as a trauma therapist. So that's a bit about SHODO. And we also have Kathy Hilton. So Kathy's joined us on a few calls. She's back again today, and she's going to be here next week as well, aren't you, Kathy? So she's she's with us quite a lot because she's got lots to offer. That's why. So Kathy is an artisan of Artisan. I always say that wrong. Artisan of Cultural Regeneration, who is facilitating societal change through awareness. And we have Sandra White again. So Sandra is a psychologist, eco-psychologist, and now sustainability consultant. She is the daughter of a Holocaust survivor, which led her on a path to understanding the factors underlying the worst of how human beings treat each other and the natural world, and how to alleviate them. Just to mention also, as we've talked about the model that Sandra mentioned in the first one, this evening Sandra is going to be sharing a bit more information about the upcoming workshop that she's offering to enable people to explore this at more depth. So we will touch on that a bit later on, and I will be assisting her in that workshop. So really looking forward to doing that. So we'll tell, just to mention, we will say a bit more about that later in the conversation. So, having now properly introduced you, sorry that was a bit late. So I'm wondering, I mean, something I feel like to explore is like how have we implemented this? You know, we definitely, I think, illuminated it in the first conversation. I'm quite keen to sort of look at how we've explored and implemented this in our life in the last 4 weeks. And I know I've really taken the challenge to do that. So I'm kind of happy to share my experience, and I am open to hearing yours as well. So something I mentioned when we had the prep session for this call was that I have really been exploring the three things that Sandra mentioned: validity, goodness, and innocence. And I've been particularly thinking about one person who I've been in a long-term conflict with, and some of them not so much of a conflict, but with both of them, what I was aware of in terms of that, it's a battle of power. I could sense it's a battle of power. I'm right, they're right, you know, and we can't kind of find a harmony between those two things. And I found it quite easy to give them their goodness and their validity, because validity, I can kind of see, we might really see the world in different ways. Well, we do see the world in different ways. Every single person sees the world in a different way. So in that, I can say, yes, we're valid in feeling how we feel. That was fine for me. Goodness, I believe inherently there is goodness in everyone. I can give them that. But I really struggled to give them their innocence. And the reason I struggled to give them their innocence is because, well, particularly with the main long-term conflict, for me, if I gave that person their innocence, it negated them having any responsibility for their actions. And so I struggled to allow them their innocence. So that was quite interesting for me. So I'm really curious to sort of see what you think about that, Sandra, what your response is to that, and anyone else, you know. That was just my experience. And even since we talked about it, I have explored it further, and I hit an absolute wall in my body of just like, no, can't give them that, can't give them that. so I'm noticing I'm getting stuck. So that's my experience. And yeah, either Sandra, if you wanted to respond to that, you're very welcome to.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. Thank you. So there are a couple of things that that come into my heart really from what you've said. First of all, I really appreciate that you are in the active inquiry. And also I really, really recognize what you've described. And I therefore want to come back to the part of our conversation when I talked about meeting the Nazi within. And that sounds like a little bit of a cliche for people who weren't present last time. That probably sounds like a little bit of a cliche. But the central proposition, just for people who weren't here last time, is that because it was ordinary people, everyday people, neighbors and friends, who got so caught up in that Nazi mindset that people that we would never have dreamed of before started to behave appallingly to Jewish people and participated in the persecution of them, and also gypsies and homosexuals and other undesirable people as far as the Nazis were defining it. And that's really the root of my inquiry, really, because it made me realize that these potentials are in all of us. So that's been part of my personal journey. I've always had it as a proposition, so I need to find it in myself. Now, first of all, I couldn't find it in myself until I was ready. And I'm 62, and I wasn't ready. I didn't have the capacity. I hadn't made enough of a journey until possibly 10 years ago. So that's not to say to you, Catherine, that you won't find it until however long into the future, but it is a way of saying that finding the most difficult things within ourselves can only come at the right time. So then the next question is, well, how do we try and foster that right time, if that's possible? And so there is something, so it's a dual approach really, and the most important approach is to keep expanding our sense of our own goodness, validity, and innocence. Because there's a way in which when we can really deeply know ourselves as these things, that's when we can really deeply see them in other people. And I do want to underline that, because I appreciated how you felt that you could give these people in your life their validity and their goodness. And that's a mixture of how you see the world, how you see yourself. It's a mixture of philosophy as well as personal attitude to yourself. And I do recognize innocence is the most difficult one. So it is really, so all I can offer is my own experience. It's the more deeply, the more embodiedly, the more in a real, genuine sense, I can say to myself, I know I behaved terribly so many times, and I equally know that I'm innocent of it. It's only when I can say that to myself that I can see that in somebody else. So I want to offer you that. I also want to, two other quick things. So very often when I'm in a difficulty with another person, it is because something about that person actually reminds me, perhaps at an unconscious level, of myself. So the thing about that person that is so difficult is actually an aspect of myself that I haven't accepted, that I haven't met, that I haven't come to terms with, that I haven't understood, that I haven't loved. So I offer you that, and partly because I want to come back to the fact that I met my inner Nazi, and actually for a very, very long time, I was involved in a kind of internal dialogue and really trying to understand, because this force within me has been very destructive in my life. And so trying to understand, why would you be that destructive? What makes you this way? And actually through that dialogue, I came to an understanding of the reasons why this particular psychic structure is within me. And of course, there are very valid reasons. So that's a very important part of the process, is to conduct that inner inquiry, looking for the aspects of the other person that are maybe within oneself. And then the very last thing I want to say is that responsibility is also a very complicated word. And very often we think about it in terms of blame, you know, that somebody did that and therefore they're responsible for it, and they're responsible for the negative outcomes. But more and more, I'm sure this is very common understanding out in the world, that the word responsibility, some people break it down into two words: response and ability, rather than ability. So that's about our ability to respond. And that's really what this approach is aimed at, is that it aims at freeing all of us from whatever it is that locks us into very destructive behaviors. And then we're able to respond with love, with compassion, with equality, with the desire for everybody else to thrive. But while we're kind of imprisoned in these, what Jung would call complexes, those aspects of us that are innate are not available. So I think those two sides to responsibility are also worth bearing in mind. And that's why it's worth the practice of innocence. Because if we can uphold, as I was talking about last time, if we can actively uphold somebody else's goodness, validity, and innocence, then we may be part of releasing them from whatever's locking them into those behaviors, and then they can be different in the world. So
yeah. Wow.
Again, I always have to apologize for taking much longer than I planned.
No, but it's fine. No, it's a real, I think that was really useful. I hope it was useful to other people to hear that, because I think that's definitely been useful for me, and I'm going to take that away and do some homework with that. Thank you. Thanks for your responses, Sandra. SHODO, I'm just wondering, oh, you're muted. I'm just wondering, it looks like you're going to say something anyway. Go on.
I have a question. I have a question. So innocence, so I was listening and it was like, okay, she doesn't mean like, I associate innocence with naivety. There's also innocence as in not guilty. And then you made a reference to being innocent of such and such an action. What meaning of innocence are we working with when we say, I understand the responsibility part? But what actual meaning of innocence? And if you said it, I apologize.
No, please don't apologize. I mean, I really believe in spiraling around, you know, and each time we spiral around, it sinks in a different way or more deeply. So the models that I draw from are very much rooted in standard psychodynamic theories that are very much about our very earliest experiences. So that's a very important reference point. So something I talked about last time was that when we are very young, we have a set of needs, and really in infancy, there's a level at which that we need those needs to be met.
Right.
And then when those needs are met, our innate character can thrive, and then the dance become, you know, the dance is a very, you know, mostly ideally happy dance between our you know, nature and nurture. You know, we're familiar with all of that. And really what I'm painting a picture of is what happens when those needs aren't met. Okay. And really I'm proposing that there's a kind of distorted response. We as an adaptation to that circumstance. And because that sets into us very, very young, I think last time I used the phrase, we're doing our very best. But actually yeah.
Okay. Yes. Right. right? I had lost that. And it's worth saying again, just that we're doing our best.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important. There are a whole other there's a whole other dimension which I do want to bring together, which is to do with us being creatures. And later, if we want to engage in a practice, that I've emphasized that. So given, you know, what we're really talking about is the gift and equally the burden of human consciousness and the human mind. You know, that is our fate to carry on Earth, and we're carrying it as creatures of Earth. The fact that we have this consciousness does not deny the fact that we're also creatures, and in a creature sense, we're also innocent of our behavior that's created by our minds. So there's another, I mean, all of this needs more expansion, I suppose, but you know, that's another dimension of the innocence as well that I try to emphasize to bring us also into more harmony with life.
So that's really good, because we do not criticize animals for, say, killing and eating other animals, but we criticize ourselves for all kinds of things about that process.
Exactly.
It's like we criticize ourselves or each other. Some of us criticize ourselves, some of us only criticize others.
Mm-hmm.
I find them particularly tiresome. It's like,
yeah, it's
how
hard.
can you think only they are bad and you are good? How can you do that?
Mm-hmm.
It's a mystery to me, but I see really a lot of it.
Yeah, and I would offer, and this really helps me. This is where innocence really, really helps me, because when I can remind myself that they can't see their own shadow, it is because they genuinely can't. You know,
Right.
when I was studying to be a Jungian analyst, there came a moment in that training when I suddenly realized, oh, the unconscious, it's really unconscious. And until I realized that, I kind of always was in an illusion that people really do know what they're doing, but actually the unconscious is really unconscious. The word means what it says. And it's the same. If people can't,
they can't.
They genuinely can't. And in that sense, they're innocent.
Most people have not spent 5 years keeping a dream journal.
Exactly.
Instance. That's, I don't know how many years I kept a dream journal.
Yeah.
But it's like, oh, right. Most people wouldn't even think of doing that. What would you want to do that for? I know when I would talk about how emotions express themselves physically, some of the responses I've gotten were, oh, so if that happens for you, then you have to take care of it. It's like they didn't imagine that it was a general statement. They just thought I was talking about how life worked for me. And then there was, oh, if people have that problem, then I suppose they should see someone. I was doing body work at the time, and I was doing emotional work with the body work. And then there's just the blank look. It's like, oh, right, people really are unconscious. And there's, gosh, the huge unconsciousness we have in this time. It's like having lived long enough. Of course, I take for granted the unconsciousness of the 1950s. It didn't serve me particularly well, but I took it for granted. And when I'm, you might say, oppressed or victimized in those ways, I tend not to notice it. But the things that the next generations do, I'm like, what? What's the matter with you?
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah. Thanks
This
for having that.
Yeah,
no, it was really helpful as well to really explore what innocence is, I think. And
yeah.
It's a word that can be used and understood in so many different ways. So I think that's really helpful to have that clarify that. Thank you.
Yeah.
So in my mind is sorry, I just wanted to come back to something that you said at the beginning, Kathy, if it's all right. When you were talking about the kind of that there are healthy elements of conquest within human behavior, and the less helpful ones, which are a kind of hindrance in terms of what we're talking about here, which is community resilience. Could you elaborate a bit more on that? What have you understood of that? And yeah, could you tell us a bit more?
does come down to what we understand by the term conquest. So if it's simply overcoming something, like overcoming a fear, overcoming a lack of information, these are included in some dictionary definitions of conquest. So those are healthy things. And it's very, well, we can look at nearly every aspect of humanity has a healthy spectrum and a shadow spectrum. And it's when we go into that unhealthy aspect of the bigger entity that we're in trouble. So conquest does have strengths. Conquest is very valuable within our identity, which is one of the reasons it has stayed with us through the evolution of humanity. But we can also go to dark places and do really unconstructive things with it.
So, boy, I have such mixed responses to that, to thinking about conquering the shadow. And of course, it's like, I would like to conquer my addiction to certain foods, but I don't think the conquering is going to be the way that I get there. I think that making peace with them and coming to terms with them and recognizing them and finding out what their message is for me and finding out what they have to give me, and then negotiating with them. I'm hearing the therapist in here, negotiating with them, and so that they can have an appropriate place in the multitude of beings that make up this persona.
Yeah.
So conquest, I don't know.
Yeah, it's a really good question. Do you want to say something to that, Kathy?
Well, looping back to what I was saying at the very beginning, anything that has a power over quality to it is an unstable solution. Like, most parents will seek to have power over their children's disruptive behaviors, and the child will rebel at some point. And how humanity progressed as much as it did was to seek to have power over nature. But nature is now going, enough, you've pushed the ecosystem too far, and it can't tolerate our power over and continue in any kind of a healthy relationship with us. I've lost the question.
No, it's about a really good response. And I think when SHODO was just responding there, I was also thinking about my experience in therapy and as being a therapist, of conquesting my difficulties has never been the answer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's so unresilient. It's fundamentally unresilient. And it's an addiction. We're addicted to trying to control our circumstances. And it's one of the reasons we're all so many people are so drawn to Indigenous cultures now, because we see it's not present with the same qualities there. And there's just a natural instinct to harmonize, to create symbiotic relationships. And we know that that's what we need to do now. We need to do it with our ecological systems. We need to learn to create food that way. And there are plenty of people who have sussed this out and are trying to educate the rest of us. But we also look to create symbiotic, well, rather than hierarchies in companies and in governance, there's such a move, there's such an instinctual population move towards harmonious symbiotic governance rather than power down structures. And I do think over the next decade we're going to see our governance massively struggle and crumble in some ways, which will probably be painful for most people who don't have this context. But part of what's happening is collapse making way for the new, because the new that's emerging is harmonious symbiotic solutions rather than power over solutions.
Great, thank you. Thanks for clarifying that, Kathy. So this feels like a really nice time to ask Sandra if she would mind sharing her practice with us, if that's all right. So we're just talking about that relationship with nature. And I know that Sandra has very lovingly prepared a practice for us in terms of the how to deal with this. So yeah, over to you, Sandra, if that's all right. We'd really love to have that shared.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm also carrying in my consciousness whether any of the people watching us or listening to us worked with it in the gap and would like to feed anything through. So I'm hoping we'll also make time for that after this, whenever it feels right to do that. So let me just outline what I'm going to do. This is a very, very simple practice. It aims to bring us and life down to perhaps one of the most simplest levels. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, don't start it, I'm just outlining what you're going to experience. I'm just going to invite you to make yourselves very comfortable where you're sitting or where you're lying and become aware of your body where you are. And then I'm going to say an affirmation 3 times, because I think saying it 3 times helps it to kind of drop down into our system a bit more. But I'm going to space it out, and I'm going to take 3 slow breaths before I start, and then in between, and then after. And a breath is in and out. So don't worry if your pacing doesn't match mine, just listen for the words. And then at the end of it, I'll remind you to become conscious again of your body where you're sitting or lying, and then invite us to come fully together again. Okay. So become aware of where you're sitting or lying. Become aware of what's supporting you. The ground supporting your feet, if you have your feet on the floor. Your sit bones, your back, your arms and legs. Become aware of where your body is in contact with what is supporting you. And take 3 slow breaths. All of life eats, digests, uses its food, and sheds its waste, as do I. Nearly all of life eats, digests, uses its food, and sheds its waste, as do I. Nearly all of life eats, digests, uses its food, and sheds its waste, as do I. Become again aware of your body being supported where you are. Feel where your body is touching what is supporting you. And feel the strength and support that is there for you. And when you're ready, come back and join us. And we can explore together what arises in the wake of that.
Thank you, Sandra. I'm really curious about the choice of phrase and why you picked that phrase. I don't know if you would mind sharing that. I'm also happy to share my experience with it, but I'm just curious why you picked that phrase, if you wouldn't mind saying.
So it's to do with coming back into our creatureness and very much to do with what SHODO said earlier, that we don't blame everything else on earth for behaving as it does. And so by connecting us with that level of life, there's a certain dimension in which we can know our validity, our goodness, and our innocence. It's a phrase that we could use at meal times, just as a reminder. I've also found, particularly linked with the breathing, that it has served to ground me, remind me of my relative importance and unimportance in the world. And what I found is because it gives me a reference to the rest of nature, it identifies me with the rest of nature. I have this paradoxical experience. It expands me, but also helps me to shrink back into my body to the right size of who I am, just living this small human life. So that's why I wanted to offer it.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Kathy or SHODO, would you like to share your experience of doing that practice? Oh, SHODO, you're muted. I think you're talking, sorry.
Thank you. Well, I was contemplating talking. I found it very calming. Yeah, that's all I remember. I did breathe. Sorry.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah, I think that's why I was curious about why you picked the statement, because yeah, it leveled me in some way with the rest of the world. That was the experience I had. It was a leveler. Yeah. So that's why, and so actually what you said was great, because it really tied in, the intention behind it really tied in with my experience. And it's always great to take some conscious breaths and to feel being supported and to consciously connect with how we're being physically supported. I always appreciate doing that as well. So thank you, Sandra. Kathy?
Certainly it confirmed the ubiquitous innocence that we are all the same. We are all the same. We are all doing our best with our nature. It confirmed something that I had already as an awareness, which is that you'll never find anybody, if ever you challenge somebody's behavior, they will always respond with a justification. You'll never find anybody who is purposefully doing wrong or disrupting. People always have a positive explanation of what they're doing to themselves. They always do. And all of our priorities are different, our values are different. So the behavior that we think is most critical most important will be different in a circumstance. But it seems to me very actually straightforward to know other people's innocence, because everybody will always give you an explanation of their innocence. You know, you just have to challenge them and they'll say, oh, but I was meaning this, or I was trying to do that, or but I was reacting to you because you did this. People always have a positive underlying intent. And for me, that does make it possible to start from a place of knowing their innocence, start from a place of knowing their sense of innocence, and then what are we going to do about it? Okay, so you've got this perspective, I've got this perspective. How are we going to honor all that needs to be honored here?
Yeah.
But as long as you're embodying that respect for them, then they will engage in a dialogue. If we condemn them, nothing good is going to happen. Yeah, as soon as you condemn somebody, you're going to create a bad resolution.
Yeah, I agree with that. And something I've really been thinking about is in dialogues is allowing people their sense of validity.
Yeah.
Because that is something in a power struggle that can often be the first thing that we try and whip away from the other. That's been my experience as I've been exploring it anyway. So like, even if I disagree with someone, allowing them their validity in what they're saying and experiencing allows that symbiotic relationship. We're not fighting for power here. We both have validity. We both have a perspective, and it's different, and that's okay, you know. But there's something about actively allowing the other to have their validity that I've been exploring, and it's really life-changing. Sandra, just to feed back to you, it's really allowed. I'm just something I'm exploring a lot in my life at the moment is, can we really be at other ends of the spectrum on how we see life, and we can still love each other, and we can still find each other. And I think this model is really helpful for that. I really do. I think it's really helpful to, you know, actively consider allowing ourselves to feel those things, and also the other, as a foundation. And I think it's a really good ground for allowing difference and honoring difference and still finding harmony. So yeah, thank you.
That that's a wonderful, both of you, all of you, a wonderful thing. And what it brought up in my mind was when you allow that somebody has positive intention, but you're also friends with somebody else who is fighting with them. And so say, if I look, we won't say who, but if I look at this person over here and say, well, they're misguided, but their intentions are positive. And somebody over here says, no, they've sold their soul to the devil. Their intentions are not positive. And if I say their intentions are positive, then I have criticized this person. Well, I didn't, you know, but it is so intense and so conflictual. And I have been that person who said, you didn't hear me, when actually they just didn't agree with me. But it's like, how can we imagine that someone could actually understand what I was saying and not agree with it? No, that can't be. You didn't understand me. Let me explain it again.
Yeah. No, and I think that's the world. If I could be part of a world that I want to happen, it's that we can allow difference, and maybe even go one step further from allowing difference and still find harmony, which is to celebrate difference. You know, like difference is a positive thing. Like I've just mentioned Lila June Johnson, who is Pat McCabe's daughter. I think I might have shared this video with you this week where she made a very kind of passionate video on Facebook saying, you know, the difference is a beautiful, beautiful thing. Let's stop believing the lie that it isn't. And I think actually, you know, we can challenge racism, we can challenge all the discriminations that go on. You know, racism is obviously quite a hot one at the moment, but there are many, many ways in which people are discriminated and separated because of difference. And I think this is a really good way of thinking about not only hopefully allowing difference and still finding harmony, but maybe going one step further and celebrating difference, because it's what makes our world beautiful, that there are many, many different things and many different people and many different perspectives and ways of seeing things. So yeah. Sandra, did you want to say so?
I was actually, Kathy, were you wanting to speak? Do you want to speak first? Do go. Yeah, please talk. Yes, please.
I'm reminded of a question that Brené Brown recommends for moments where you are unaware, where you can't see the other person's good intent. And she suggests the simple question, help me understand this. Help me understand what's going on for you here. And I guarantee you will always get an explanation of good intent from the other person. You may not agree with their priority. You may not agree with the ramifications of their value system, but you will find out that they had good intent.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Yes, I do completely agree. I want to just offer something to the situation where one or two people in a conflictual conversation can't hear each other. And SHODO, when I was listening to you just now, I don't know if this was your intention, but I got quite a visceral experience of a kind of tension in the body in perhaps one of the speakers or perhaps both of the people that you were describing. And in addition to what we're talking about in terms of the importance and the value and the beauty of diversity, and also Kathy, you talking earlier about resilience, how important this is to resilience as well. I just want to bring in the aspect of, well, my theory, that sounds a bit officious, but you know what I'm trying to bring out. that is to do with compensation. And I want to make this really personal to me. It's because on this journey, particularly the last few years, I came to realize that my need to be good was very, very great. And my need to be good had a massive ingredient in it that is to do with me compensating for myself, me justifying my existence. In a way, I can say that's the root of this way that I've put these words together. And I know that that's to do with what I've inherited from my mother's experience of being born into Nazi Germany. And what I noticed in myself was that in my total need to justify myself, and my way of doing it was to be ultra good, I couldn't listen. So I might have a reasonable analysis of what I think the ills of the world are and what might help. But actually, if I can't in any situation be fully present and listen to everybody else and attune myself to everybody else and be in dialogue, respectful dialogue with everybody else, then I'm as good as useless. Because really, whatever soundness there is in my perspectives, if I can't embody it, I guess is what I'm saying, and really be present and respectful and loving in the face of diverse opinions, some of which are very challenging, if I have to force myself, impose myself and my goodness on a situation, then actually I can't really contribute very much of value to it. And so that it was that quality, SHODO, when you were talking about, it may have been a projection of mine, but it was that quality of tension, that quality of not being able to listen, that quality of stress that kind of reminded me of my own journey and my need to compensate for myself. And really that's what I want to offer, is a key ingredient in our civilization's need to conquer. And it's a long time since I wrote it, so I can't anymore quote it verbatim, but Freud absolutely nailed it. Perhaps I can include it, if it's not too much of an imposition, Catherine, when you post the recording, if I send it to you, perhaps you could include it in the text underneath the YouTube recording, because he talked about nature's extreme expressions, storms, earthquakes, and how they remind us of our helplessness in the face of nature. And the quote actually says that the task of civilization is to conquer nature. And so he makes the connection between how we understand our civilization, our pursuit of civilization, our creation of our modern civilization, and its compensatory nature, that we're trying to relieve ourselves of the feeling of helplessness, which I think is so closely connected with feelings of dependence. That's what we can't somehow as modern people come to terms with. And yet I think is part of the attraction to very many modern people of indigenous ways of living and thinking, is because they seem to, without hopefully idealizing, they seem to have come to terms with that dependence and in a way feel safe within it and understand the necessity for it. So it's, when we're trying to think about dismantling conquest, in addition to all of the reasons why we need to do it, part of what I think is so important is to understand something about one, at least, of the causes of why we've not been able to stop it, in addition to thinking it's normal. I think it is because we've lost our, when we have lost our sense of being good, valid and innocent, then we have to compensate, and then we have to have power over, and then we deny everything else its validity, because we've taken to ourselves in our compensatory drive all the validity. I know that I talked about that last time, but I think it's useful to keep reminding ourselves of that.
Yeah, I think it really is. And I think something I've noticed in terms of the compensatory element of it is that if I look at the behavior I'm doing and what it's compensating for, it's often the opposite. So if I'm seeking control, it's because I feel out of control, is one example. Yeah. And I think what you just touched on there about the powerlessness that is inherent in the human experience, you know, that we can't avoid death, but yet we really don't deal with death very well in our culture, particularly this culture. You know, and yet we are powerless to death. We're all going to go through that. So there is this inherent element of our existence that is dependent and powerless. And I think they're possibly two things that are very, very difficult to really come into sort of direct contact with. And I agree, that's my experience of you know, Indigenous, not just Indigenous teachings, but the visceral feel of being in the company of those in Indigenous ways of life, and they have a peace with all of that. There is a peace, yeah, which is threatening, I suppose, on some level, isn't it? It's threatening to me if I'm not at peace with that in myself. So yeah, interesting. Thank you for adding that. So I just wanted to acknowledge that we just had a comment from Leslie, who's just said, thank you so much, this is really helpful. So just to say that. We haven't unfortunately had any responses from people as to who might have done part one. So unfortunately we haven't got anything from that. But I thought it'd be nice just to sort of hear a bit more about, you know, what do we do? What do we think are kind of practical, important things in understanding this, particularly the unhelpful side of it, the unstable side of it? What do we do? What do we do? What do we do? You know, I think we're deepening into kind of understanding it. And I think that's really, really helpful. And I'm just wondering what steps people can take. And I'm also wondering, how important is awareness as a foundation? You know, can people take steps to dismantling it without being self-aware of their own relationship to it? That's just a question I have. Open to any of you responding to either or both of those questions. SHODO?
Well, I have to start with what Sandra was talking about, because you said so many things, I probably can't retain them all. I'm going to mention two, and then I'm going to see if I can follow this path around. And you can remind me to relate it to the questions you just asked, Catherine.
Oh, no worries.
So one thing, I think it feels like a beginning, was your mother growing up in Nazi Germany, and that feeling, let me see, oh, you have to justify your existence. So I want to put that next to when I was talking about those people who say, you know, if you don't condemn them, I'm not safe with you, is what they're saying. I'm not, if you don't condemn them. And those are people who are watching their family, friends, and relatives being shot by police, or being murdered and nobody cares, missing and murdered Indigenous women and so forth. And so there's a literal feeling of unsafety that I've almost forgotten. When I was a young woman, I was kind of trained to not feel safe. But that fundamental, they want me and my people dead. It's like, so that's alive and well now. You are a generation, I mean, your mother lived through it. And then you're a generation after, and then we go on through time. But that's like, they want me dead. So that's one thing. Oh, no. So here's another piece of it, is that the people that civilization once dead are the people who are allied with nature. And right now, somehow with the movements of our society, we're going back to recognizing and sort of romanticizing the people who are connected with nature, or who in our collective psyche, we think of as connected with nature, and then sometimes they are. I'm thinking of all the indigenous people I know, which I haven't counted them all, but it's like, well, they do horses. Naturally, they do horses. They're comfortable with horses. Horses are part of life. They also have dogs. And I've been around white people for whom, having a horse is a natural part of life. But I've never been such a person. It's an idealized, wonderful, oh, I wish kind of thing. And so on the one hand, I have this sense of, oh, they are connected with nature. On the other hand, they're constantly dealing with alcoholism, murders, not mostly by each other, but I mean, the presence of death in those communities is astounding, and the level of poverty in those communities, and something that is called mental illness, which is not necessarily mental illness. It can be, but it can also just be an appropriate response to the disaster that's going on around you. And then Freud, quoting Freud about civilization conquering nature. So that explains all the people I know who are anti-civilization, and I'm one of them. It's like conquering nature is the stupidest thing. And we've come to a place, it's like we've been doing this for so many thousands of years that we don't know how to live another way. And so we make these little attempts, and we call it decolonizing, or we learn permaculture, or we learn various things, trying not to be dependent on the civilization that is destroying that which we absolutely need to survive, even physically, not even the spiritually going to the mountains or the woods, but physically, we need the natural world to survive. And as far as I can tell, civilization is going faster and faster in the destruction. We've noticed, and we haven't slowed down. I go, okay, help me. So I can say, I can try to slow down. I'm happy. I did move out to the country, which made me more dependent on fossil fuels. Wasn't the plan, but that's the way it's working out. But then we look both at ourselves and the world in which we live, and it's like, okay, what do we do about that? Oh, so my resentment of depending on civilization might correlate to somebody else's resentment of depending on nature. I'll stop there.
Thanks, SHODO. Thank you for sharing that. Kathy, how are you doing? It's been quite quiet. I'm just wondering, I'm in my mind a little bit, I'm sort of constructing what's really important in Dismantling Conquest, because I'm aware we've only got about 10 minutes left, and what do we need to convey in the next, in this last bit of time we have? What do you think about what's really important to sort of dismantle?
Well, I was thinking of your question, how do we do it? What are our practices? And I think a first thing is to allow yourself a pause. So when you find yourself, if you can, start to identify in yourself a sense of, I'm not in control of a situation, I'm feeling out of control, I'm feeling vulnerable, my natural draw is to try and get control of something here. You may be drawn to be trying to control a person, a situation, an agreement, nature, your government, whatever. The first thing to do is pause and notice you're in that response. Pause and notice you're in that response. Pause and notice you're in that response. And then Sandra's model, which has these three cornerstones of goodness, innocence, and validity, presence, that both I and they have goodness, innocence, and validity. And my wish, my hope is that pause can be taken, that an urgent solution doesn't have to be found. In fact, can we think of suggestions that people could take in that moment? You can say, I'd really like to give this some thought. I don't feel like I can give you my best reaction on this. Can I come back to you on this? Set up a community group to imagine, to focus on, to presence the innocence, goodness, and validity of something that your community is in conflict with. So say your community is in conflict with the government, set up a community group, have a few meetings to presence their goodness, innocence, and validity. Try and understand where they're coming from. Stop villainizing them. I know there's validity in villainizing people who are doing bad things to us, but probably you've been doing that for a long time, and probably you're not getting the results you want, or it wouldn't still feel like an issue. So take some real genuine effort into putting aside the resentments, putting aside the conviction that this other body that you're not finding resolution with is somehow not good, innocent, and kind. Put those aside. They may be valid. I'm not saying they're not valid, but put them to the side and explore what their motives might be. And once that informs your response, then respond. Yeah. So whether you find yourself reacting to a person in your life, an individual on a small matter, take pause, or if it's some huge and fundamental aspect of your life, see what opportunities you can find to take pause and get present to their goodness, kindness. I've been saying it wrong. Innocence, validity, and goodness. Okay. Innocence, validity, and goodness. I'm going to think of other lines you can speak to give yourself that opportunity to take a break. So what else could be said? There's, I don't feel like I can give you my best reaction on this. Can I come back to you on this? There's, oh man, I'm really mad at you right now. I am sure, I can't see what's valid in what you're saying. Help me understand where you're coming from. What other sentences could be spoken to change the dynamic?
Can I interject something slightly?
Yeah.
Because I feel like it's really helpful what you've said, and it sounds like it's very much about the interpersonal relationships. I'm wondering about the other ways that we conquest, particularly maybe with nature and animals. I feel like animals have to deal with a hell of a lot of human conquest. So I'm just wondering what from what you've said, how might that apply to if we notice that we're being particularly harsh on our dog, or you know, or that we're, you know, being very unconscious in our relationship with our garden, or and just kind of, you know, doing what we want with it without really having a relationship with it. How could we apply and adapt that to those elements of how we may be conquesting? Conquesting, it's not the right word, I know, but conquering is the right word, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, I'm reminded of what Sandra said last time, which was holding my validity and their validity, holding them, inquire into it, take some pause, give it some good thought, some investigation. And I would say that once that information informs your response, then you're drawn to harmonious solutions. And harmonious solutions, symbiotic solutions, have staying power.
Yeah, thank you. Sandra, would you like to add something to that?
Well, just to thank you, Kathy. That was very. I really appreciate the thought that you've given to it, and also the practicality of what you're suggesting. But I also was reminded of what SHODO talked about last time we were together, and with your question, Catherine, about what about the non-human world or the more than human world. And SHODO, I wanted to invite you again, if you were willing, to remind us of sentences that you say, Zen sentences. And I think when we were in that conversation recently to prepare for this conversation, you brought in a new one that I have to say I fell in love with. So I'd love you to share that. I can remind you if necessary, but I think it'll land in your mind. But I can remind you if necessary.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, let's have, if you'd like to share the SHODO. Oh, you're muted.
Together with all beings, we open the ground for new life. For pruning, together with all beings, may life return to the roots. Together with all beings, may you return to your true home. That was for pulling up invasives, which is a major activity here. Now, there was another one, wasn't there? And that's the one you're asking about. And do I remember it?
Maybe Sandra can remind us if she's happy to.
Oh, do you have enough to share? Is it that one? Yes. All of those are courtesy of Sawyer, what is Sawyer Hitchcock, who was here for a few weeks.
So was it, it's asking, sorry, it's asking the plants, isn't it? Do you have enough to share?
That last one, he was harvesting, and it's like, okay, do you, I want dandelion heads, or I want nettles, or do you have enough to share? May I have this? And it's foraging season, and I need to remember that. It's like, what if every time I foraged, I asked those questions? What would that do to my relationship with the wild beings of the land, or the garden beings either? I don't know.
Yeah, and I think in any little ways we can introduce that questioning and relating with everything. I feel like we could take it into every little thing. I try to be really aware at the moment of particularly since we've been exploring this, how I interact with everything. Even I noticed, I think I mentioned it last time, when I put food in my basket, do I throw it in, or do I honor it as I take it off the shelf and feel grateful for this food that I have and what's gone behind getting it, and place it lovingly in my basket? Like just having more of a conscious relationship with every element of our lives, because it's all part of the one. There isn't, as I'm sure we all know, any separation. So okay, I think we're going to need to wind up soon. So I just wanted to thank you so much, ladies, for this additional conversation. It's been really helpful. And I think, yeah, really glad we've done it. Thank you. I wanted to ask Sandra if she would mind, just before we finish, just sharing a little bit about her upcoming workshop, which she's offering in June, which is going to go a bit deeper into the models that she's described here.
Yeah, thank you very much, Catherine. So it's a 2-day workshop that's separated by 2 weeks in between. And really what we're going to focus on is the project, really, the task that I'm really recommending of expanding our sense within ourselves of goodness, validity, and innocence. So it's going to be experiential. There will be, we'll offer a practice, I'll offer a practice on the first day and encourage you to keep practicing it during the interim period. And to support that, we're going to invite you to form buddy pairs. So there'll be, and the other thing I wanted to say is that we're building in a lot of time. It's quite a spacious experience. We're not going to rush anybody. We want to allow full time to explore reactions. There will be a bit more about the theory, but trying to not make it too intellectual, but you'll have opportunities to interrogate, question, clarify. That will be part of it. But most of it is experiential to expand our sense of goodness, validity, and innocence. And the dates are the 12th and 26th of June, 10:30 to 4:30 on Zoom. And I really, really, with all my heart, just want to thank you, Catherine, for making this suggestion and for organising it and me and, you know, helping to bring it into the world. Thank you so much.
My absolute pleasure. As I've said, and as Kathy said, and well, I think all three of us have been really impacted by your theory and your model. And yeah, it was my suggestion for us to offer this workshop to actually take it that step further and support people to bring it into their lives, because I've been really touched by it. It's really changed my life and my relationships. So yeah, so I'm really glad that's happening. For anyone who's on Facebook, if you look on the Facebook feed, David has just posted the Facebook event for the first day. If you're watching this and you're not on Facebook and you'd like to find out more about that, you can email me at communityresilience.livetalks@gmail.com and I will happily give you some more information. Okay, so next week we will be talking, we're doing part 2 of reimagining food resilience. Kathy's going to be back with us for that. And so we have Kathy and Wendy, who were part of the first conversation, and we have a wonderful gentleman called Mothin Ali, who's going to be joining us for that third conversation. Mothin is a Bangladeshi Muslim who lives in Leeds, and he is doing lots of work. Well, he runs a YouTube channel, very successful YouTube channel called My Family Garden, but he's also doing some work in his community challenging racism through gardening. Through gardening projects. So I'm really looking forward to having him on the conversation and exploring more about how we can engage with food resilience. So, and looking forward to more of what Kathy's exploring around that as well. So yeah. Okay. Thank you, ladies. It's been rich and wonderful, and wishing you all well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. All the best.
And